When was the last time you woke up and felt truly rested? Not just awake, not just functioning, but rested, clear, light, peaceful. If you are over 50, maybe that question feels almost unrealistic. Maybe you wake up because your mind starts working before your body does. Maybe you wake up tired, even after 6 hours in bed. Maybe you tell yourself, this is just part of getting older. That's what I used to believe. For most of my adult life, I slept 5 hours a night, sometimes six, rarely more. And I was proud of it. I thought it meant I was disciplined, productive, strong. At 50 years old, I believe sleep was optional. Responsibility have been married for 27 years, have been married for 27 years. Two grown children, one grandson, a small accounting business that I built from my kitchen table decades ago. From the outside, my life looked stable. Inside, I was exhausted. For years, my routine never changed. I went to bed around midnight, sometimes later, after finishing paperwork, after watching the news, after scrolling on my phone longer than I meant to. Then I would wake up at 5:30 a.m. Not because I was ready, but because I had to. Coffee replaced rest, routine replaced energy. I told myself something many adults say: I'll sleep when I retire. But at 50, retirement still felt far away, and my body was starting to disagree with my mindset. The signs were subtle at first. I forgot small things, names, passwords, appointments. I felt irritated more easily, not angry, just thinner, like my patience had worn down. In the afternoons, I felt a strange heaviness behind my eyes, a quiet fog in my thoughts. But I pushed through, because that's what responsible adults do. We push through. My husband noticed before I did. "You're tired all the time," he said one evening. "I'm just busy," I answered. Busy. That word again. It sounds productive. It hides exhaustion well. At night, when I finally lay down, my body felt tired, but my mind did not. My thoughts moved quickly: lists, deadlines, conversations from earlier in the day, small worries that felt larger in the dark. I would turn from one side to the other, check the clock, calculate how many hours I had left before morning. 5 hours. 4.5. 4. And somehow, worrying about sleep made sleep even harder. One afternoon, I picked up my grandson from preschool. He ran toward me with so much energy it almost startled me. His laugh was loud, his questions endless. "Grandma, why is the sky blue?" "Grandma, can we race to the car?" I smiled, but inside I felt slow, heavy, older than I wanted to feel. Driving home, I realized something quietly painful. I didn't have the energy to fully enjoy him. Not because I was sick, not because I was unhappy, because I was tired, deeply tired. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table after everyone had gone to bed. The house was silent. The clock on the wall ticked softly. I felt something I had been avoiding for years: burnout, not dramatic burnout, not collapse, but slow depletion, like a battery that never reaches 100% anymore. I started reading about sleep, not medical journals, just simple articles. And one sentence stopped me. Adults over 50 still need around 7 to 8 hours of sleep for optimal cognitive and emotional health. Still need. Not used to need. Not if possible. Need. I had not given myself 8 hours of sleep in years, not once. And suddenly that felt shocking. I began to ask myself uncomfortable questions. What if I'm not just tired? What if I'm underrested? What if my foggy thinking, my short patience, my low energy are not age? What if they are sleep deprivation? The idea felt almost too simple. Could the solution really be going to bed earlier? It sounded almost childish, like advice you give to teenagers. But I decided to try, not dramatically, not perfectly, just intentionally. The first night, I turned off the television at 9:30 p.m. That alone felt radical. I brushed my teeth, washed my face, and got into bed at 10 p.m. My mind protested. It's too early. You still have emails. You're not tired enough. But I stayed. No phone, no scrolling, just quiet. I didn't fall asleep immediately. But something shifted. Instead of fighting the dark, I accepted it. Instead of checking the clock, I closed my eyes, and sometime between thoughts, I drifted off. When I woke up, sunlight was already touching the curtains. For a moment, I felt confused. Had I overslept? I looked at the clock. 6:15 a.m. I had slept more than 8 hours. 8. It felt unfamiliar, almost luxurious. But the real surprise was not the number of hours. It was how I felt, clear, not rushed, not dragged out of sleep, just awake, gently awake. That first morning, I made coffee slowly, not desperately. I noticed the smell, the steam rising from the cup, the quiet hum of the refrigerator. My body felt lighter. My thoughts felt softer. It was subtle, but undeniable. Of course, one night does not change a life. The next evening, I stayed up too late again. Old habits are strong, but the memory of that rested morning stayed with me, and I wanted it back. So I tried again, and again. Some nights were imperfect. Some nights I woke up at 3 a.m., but slowly, over weeks, my body began adjusting. My eyes felt heavy earlier. My mornings felt calmer. My afternoons felt less foggy. The change was not dramatic. It was gentle. And maybe that's why I almost missed it. One afternoon, about a month later, I picked up my grandson again. He ran toward me, just like always. But this time, when he said, "Grandma, race you to the car," I ran, not fast, not young, but with energy, real energy. And I laughed, not politely, not tiredly, but freely. That evening, I realized something that surprised me. I had spent decades believing that discipline meant staying up late to finish work. Now I was beginning to understand that discipline might mean protecting sleep, protecting rest, protecting recovery. If you are 50 or 60 or even older, and you wake up tired every day, I want you to consider something gently. Maybe it's not just age. Maybe your body is simply asking for what it has always needed: time, darkness, quiet, 8 hours. I used to think sleep was a luxury. Now I see it as maintenance, as medicine, as permission to slow down without guilt. And this is only the beginning of what changed. Because once I started sleeping 8 hours, other parts of my life began to shift too. For many years, I believed that sleep was something flexible, something optional, something I could reduce when life became busy. At 50 years old, I was proud of the fact that I could survive on 5 hours of sleep, sometimes even 4. I told myself it was normal. I told myself that everyone my age felt tired. I told myself that waking up at 3:17 in the morning and staring at the ceiling was just part of getting older. But something had begun to change after I made the decision to protect 8 full hours of rest. Not perfect sleep, not magical sleep, just 8 quiet hours in bed. The first week felt uncomfortable. I went to bed earlier than usual, 10 p.m. That felt strange, almost childish. The house was still active. My wife was watching television. My phone was lighting up with notifications, emails, news alerts, messages from friends. I felt like I was missing something important, as if the world might continue without me. And of course, it did. But something surprising happened. The world did not need me at 10:30 p.m. It did not need my opinions. It did not need my scrolling. It did not need my anxiety. So I turned the phone off, not silent, off. That small action felt powerful. The second week was harder. My body was not used to rest. Even when I lay in bed for 8 hours, I did not sleep deeply. I woke up several times. I checked the clock. 1:42 a.m., 3:58 a.m., 5:11 a.m. But instead of getting up, I stayed still. I breathed slowly. Inhale, exhale. I told myself, this is part of the process. Something else began to change. During the day, I felt slightly calmer, not energetic, not excited, just calmer. And calmness at 50 feels like a gift. I noticed that I did not snap at my coworkers as quickly. When someone sent an email that sounded cold or demanding, I did not immediately react. I paused. That pause was new. Before, when I slept 5 hours, my mind felt sharp but fragile, like thin glass. One small pressure and it would crack. With more rest, my mind felt softer, more flexible. I also began to notice my body in new ways. My shoulders were less tight in the morning. For years, I woke up with tension across my neck, as if I had been carrying invisible weight while sleeping. Now, some mornings, I woke up and realized something surprising. There was no pain, just stillness. One Saturday morning, about 3 weeks into this experiment, I woke up before my alarm. 6:45 a.m. Sunlight was entering the room, soft, warm. I did not feel the usual heaviness. That heavy feeling used to sit on my chest every morning. A quiet dread, a sense of already being tired before the day began. That morning, I felt neutral, and neutral felt extraordinary. I walked to the kitchen slowly, made coffee, sat at the table without turning on the television. The house was silent. Instead of thinking about tasks and deadlines, I noticed something simple. I could hear birds outside. I had lived in this house for 12 years, and I had never really heard them in the morning because I was always rushing, or exhausted, or irritated. Sleep did not solve my problems. My job was still demanding. My responsibilities were still heavy. My body was still aging. But something important had shifted. My reactions were different. My patience was longer. Even my appetite changed. When I slept 5 hours, I craved sugar constantly. In the afternoon, around 2:30 p.m., I always wanted something sweet. Chocolate, cookies, anything fast. But with more sleep, that craving became softer. It did not disappear completely, but it was no longer urgent. I began to understand something I had ignored for decades. Fatigue is not just tiredness, it is distortion. When I was exhausted, everything looked worse. Problems looked bigger. People looked more annoying. The future looked darker. With rest, reality became more balanced. One evening, my wife looked at me and said something unexpected. "You seem different lately." I asked her what she meant. She said, "You listen more." That sentence stayed with me. For years, I thought I was listening, but maybe I was only waiting to respond. When the brain is tired, it wants efficiency. It wants to move quickly. It wants to finish conversations. It wants silence. With more sleep, I could sit in a conversation without rushing it. I could tolerate pauses. I could accept disagreement without feeling attacked. Around week 4, something else happened. I stopped bragging about being busy. That may sound small, but in American culture, Especially for middle-aged professionals, being busy is a badge of honor. I only slept 4 hours. I worked all weekend. I'm exhausted. We say these things with pride, as if suffering proves value. But I began to see it differently. What if rest is strength? What if 8 hours of sleep is not laziness, but intelligence? One afternoon at work, I made a mistake, a small financial error in a report. In the past, I would have panicked. I would have replayed it in my mind all evening. But that day, I corrected it calmly. I apologized, and I moved forward. That night, I still slept. This was new. Mistakes used to follow me into bed. They would sit beside me in the dark. Now, they stayed at the office. Sleep was becoming a boundary, a gentle but firm line between day and night. And slowly, I started to realize something deeper. For most of my adult life, I treated my body like a machine. Push it, fuel it, ignore warning lights, expect performance. But machines break, bodies whisper first, then they speak louder. Sleep was my body's whisper, and for the first time in 50 years, I was finally listening. By the second month, something quiet but powerful had changed. Sleep was no longer an experiment, it was becoming a priority. Not a perfect habit, not a strict rule, but a decision I protected. And protecting it required more than just going to bed earlier. It required changing the rhythm of my evenings. For years, my nights were crowded. Television in the background, phone in my hand, emails just to check, snacks just because. My body would lie down at midnight, but my brain was still running, still processing, still reacting. Now, around 9 p.m., I began dimming the lights in the house. Not dramatically, just softer lamps instead of bright overhead lights. That small change signaled something to my mind. The day is ending. You can slow down. I stopped watching the late-night news. I used to believe I needed to stay informed. But I realized something honest. The world's problems at 10:45 p.m. did not require my immediate attention. They only required my anxiety, and anxiety does not help sleep. Instead, I began reading simple books. Nothing intense, nothing professional, just calm stories. Sometimes I only read 5 pages before my eyes felt heavy, and instead of fighting that feeling, I followed it. That was new. For decades, I ignored sleepiness. I treated it like weakness. Now I treated it like guidance. Around this time, I noticed a deeper change. My mornings were no longer rushed battles. Before, my alarm felt like an enemy, a loud interruption pulling me from unfinished rest. Now, many mornings, I woke up a few minutes before it rang, gently, naturally. And instead of jumping out of bed with tension, I stretched, slowly. I cannot explain how powerful that felt. And to wake up without resentment, to greet the morning without dread. One Tuesday afternoon, I had back-to-back meetings. 4 hours of numbers, questions, small conflicts. In the past, that kind of day would leave me drained. I would drive home in silence, irritated by traffic, annoyed by small inconveniences. But that day, I noticed something different. I was tired, but not depleted. There is a difference. Tired means you used your energy. Depleted means you had none to begin with. Sleep had filled my reserves. It had given me margin. And margin changed everything. I also began noticing emotional changes. Small ones, subtle ones. When my daughter called to vent about her job, I listened without trying to fix everything. When my husband forgot to take out the trash, I did not react sharply. Before, little things felt bigger. Now they felt manageable. Sleep was softening my edges. One evening, as I folded laundry, I realized something surprising. I felt content, not excited, not entertained, just quietly content. For years, evenings were filled with restlessness. I needed noise. I needed distraction. I needed stimulation. Now, I could sit in a quiet room without reaching for my phone, and that stillness felt safe. Around week 8, I had a small setback. A stressful tax season deadline approached. Old habits returned. 2 nights in a row, I stayed up past midnight. I told myself it was temporary, necessary, but I felt the difference immediately. The next morning, my thoughts felt heavier, my patience shorter, my cravings stronger. It was not dramatic, but it was noticeable. Instead of ignoring it, I paid attention. This is what 5 hours feels like now. And I did not like it. Not because it was unbearable, but because I now knew what 8 hours felt like. Once you experience real rest, it becomes harder to accept constant exhaustion as normal. That realization changed my perspective. For decades, I had normalized fatigue. I thought everyone felt this way: foggy, irritable, low level anxious. But maybe many of us are simply underrested. Maybe we are not broken. Maybe we are tired. Sleep began influencing other choices too. I started eating dinner slightly earlier, not heavy meals at 9:30 p.m., but lighter meals around 7 o'clock. I reduced caffeine after noon. At first, I resisted that change. I loved my afternoon coffee. But when I replaced it with herbal tea, I noticed my evenings felt calmer. Falling asleep became easier, and waking up felt steadier. The changes were not extreme. They were gentle adjustments. But gentle adjustments, repeated daily, create real transformation. One Sunday afternoon, my grandson was building blocks on the living room floor. He looked up at me and said, "Grandma, you don't look tired today." Children are honest. They do not filter. I smiled. "How did I look before?" He shrugged. "Like this," he said, squinting his eyes dramatically. I laughed, and I realized something beautiful. Children notice presence, not productivity. He did not care how many clients I helped or how organized my calendar was. He noticed my face, my eyes, my energy, and sleep was changing that energy. By the third month, 8 hours no longer felt unusual. It felt necessary, expected, respected. I began planning my day around protecting my night, not the other way around. That shift felt radical. For most of my life, sleep adjusted to my schedule. Now, my schedule adjusted to my sleep, and slowly, I began to understand something deeper. Rest is not a reward for finishing everything. Rest is what allows you to continue. At 50, I do not have the same physical resilience I had at 30, but I have something better now: awareness. And that awareness is teaching me this: you cannot borrow energy forever. Eventually, the debt must be paid. Sleep is not wasted time. It is restoration. It is emotional repair. It is cognitive clarity. It is patience. It is softness. It is strength. And this is only the middle of the story. Because once I truly respected sleep, my entire relationship with aging began to change. For many years, I believed that being tired was normal. At 50 years old, I had accepted exhaustion as part of my personality. I would wake up already feeling behind. Even before my feet touched the floor, my mind was racing. Emails, deadlines, family responsibilities, small worries that never seemed small. And underneath all of that, a quiet, constant fatigue, not dramatic, not urgent, just always there, like background noise. I told myself I was just getting older. I told myself everyone felt this way. I told myself sleep was a luxury, something for weekends, something for vacations, something for people with less responsibility. But the truth was more uncomfortable. I did not know how to rest. Even when I lay in bed, my body was still working. My shoulders were tight, my jaw was clenched, my thoughts were running. I would wake up at 2:13 a.m. or 3:47 a.m. for no clear reason, and instead of breathing slowly and relaxing, I would check my phone, news headlines, work messages, weather updates. It felt harmless, but it wasn't. The blue light from the screen made my brain think it was morning. My mind would fully wake up, and falling back asleep became almost impossible. By morning, I had slept maybe 5 hours, sometimes 6, rarely more, and I told myself it was enough. But something changed during my third week of trying to sleep 8 full hours. Not something dramatic, not something loud, something quiet. I started noticing my evenings. Before, my evenings were a blur. Television playing, phone in hand, snacks in the kitchen, one more email, one more scroll, one more distraction. But when I committed to 8 hours of sleep, I had to count backward. If I wanted to wake up at 6 a.m., I needed to be asleep by 10 p.m., not in bed at 10. Asleep. That meant winding down earlier. At first, it felt impossible. At 9:30 p.m., I still felt alert, or at least I thought I did. But I began creating small signals for my body. At 9 p.m., I turned off the television. At 9:10, I dimmed the lights. At 9:15, I put my phone in the kitchen, not next to my bed, not on the nightstand, in another room. That one decision felt extreme, almost uncomfortable. What if someone needed me? What if something happened? But I realized something important. For years, nothing truly urgent had happened at 2 a.m., and if it did, someone could call twice. The world would not collapse because I slept. The first few nights were restless. My body did not trust the new routine. I would lie there, waiting, listening to the quiet. My mind would try to create problems. Did I forget something? Should I check my email one more time? Did I lock the door? But instead of reacting, I practiced something simple. Breathing in slowly for 4 seconds, holding for 4, breathing out for 6, over and over. At first, it felt mechanical, but by the 5th night, something softened. My body began to recognize the pattern. Dim lights, no screens, slow breathing, and sleep started arriving more gently. Not suddenly, but naturally, like it used to when I was younger. By the end of the 3rd week, I noticed something surprising. My mornings felt quieter. Not quieter outside, quieter inside. I still had responsibilities, still had work, still had bills and expectations. But my reactions were different. I was less irritated in traffic, less impatient in meetings, less sharp in my tone at home. I realized something that surprised me deeply. I had not been angry. I had been tired. So many small conflicts in my life were fueled by exhaustion. When I started sleeping 8 hours, my emotional balance shifted. I could pause before responding. I could listen longer. I could let small things go. There was another change too. My body felt different. For years, I had blamed aging for my stiffness, my knees in the morning, my lower back, the heavy feeling in my legs. But with consistent sleep, that heaviness began to ease, not completely, but noticeably. I learned that during deep sleep, the body repairs itself. Muscles recover, inflammation reduces, hormones reset. I had been cutting that process short for years, expecting my body to function without giving it time to repair. Sleep was not laziness, it was maintenance, like charging a phone fully instead of letting it stay at 15%. And perhaps the most surprising change was my thinking. my thoughts became clearer. Before, I would forget small details, where I put my keys, why I entered a room, what someone had just said. I worried quietly about memory loss, about aging. But with 8 hours of sleep, my focus improved. My recall sharpened. I felt present, fully present, in conversations, in decisions, even in simple moments like drinking coffee in the morning. There was a steadiness that had been missing, and I began to understand something profound. For decades, I believed productivity meant staying up late, pushing through fatigue, sacrificing rest. But at 50, I finally saw the truth. Rest is not the opposite of productivity, it supports it. When I slept 8 hours, I completed tasks faster. I made fewer mistakes. I needed less caffeine. I did not crash in the afternoon. My energy was not dramatic, it was stable. And stability at this stage of life felt like wealth. Of course, not every night was perfect. There were evenings when stress returned, when sleep felt distant. But the difference was consistency. Most nights, I protected my sleep. I treated it like an appointment, an important meeting with my future self, because that is what it truly was. Every full night of rest was a gift to the man I would be tomorrow. I used to think change had to be dramatic to matter. New diets, new jobs, big resolutions. But sleeping 8 hours at 50 taught me something else. Small consistency changes everything. Not overnight, not in a week, but slowly, gently, deeply. And perhaps the most beautiful realization was this: I did not need to prove my strength by staying exhausted. I did not need to earn my rest. I was allowed to recover. I was allowed to slow down. I was allowed to sleep. And in that simple permission, my whole life began to feel different. By the time I reached the 8th week of sleeping 8 hours a night, something inside me had quietly shifted. Not just my energy, not just my mood, but my identity. For most of my adult life, I had worn exhaustion like a badge of honor. I was the dependable one, the one who stayed up late, the one who pushed through, the one who said, I'm fine, even when I was running on empty. But now, at 50, I began to question that story. Was I really strong because I ignored my body? Or was I simply afraid to slow down? There is something uncomfortable about rest. When the house becomes quiet, when the lights are dim, when the noise of the day fades, you are left alone with your thoughts. For years, I filled my evenings with sound, television, podcasts, scrolling, snacks, anything to avoid stillness. But protecting 8 hours of sleep forced me to face the silence. And in that silence, I discovered something surprising. I was not as anxious as I thought. I was overstimulated. My nervous system had been in constant alert mode. News alerts, work emails, late night conversations, bright lights, caffeine too late in the day. My body never truly powered down. It was always prepared for the next demand. When I began respecting a steady sleep schedule, my nervous system slowly recalibrated. Around 9:30 p.m., my eyelids naturally felt heavier. Around 6 a.m., I woke up before my alarm, gently, without panic, without a racing heart, just awake. That alone felt miraculous. I began noticing how sleep affected my relationships. Before, when my wife asked a simple question late at night, I would answer quickly, and sometimes sharply, not because I was angry, because I was depleted. Now in the evenings, I had a little more patience, a little more softness. Conversations felt slower, kinder. And in the mornings, instead of rushing immediately into my phone, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. No screen, just light coming through the window. Birds outside, the sound of the heater turning on. I had not realized how many years I had skipped over mornings. Sleep gave them back to me. There was also a physical change I did not expect. My cravings shifted. When I slept 5 or 6 hours, I wanted sugar the next day. Pastries, chips, extra bread. It felt like my body was searching for fast energy. But after consistent, full nights of rest, those cravings softened. I still enjoyed food, but I did not feel desperate for it. I later learned that sleep affects hunger hormones, that when we are tired, the body increases signals that tell us to eat. I had blamed myself for lack of discipline, when in reality, I was underrested. At 50, this realization felt liberating. So much of what I thought was weakness was simply fatigue. There were setbacks, of course. One stressful week at work pulled me back into old habits. I stayed up past 11:30 p.m., checked emails in bed, watched late-night television. Within 3 days, I felt the difference. Shorter patience, foggy thinking, that heavy afternoon slump. It was like revisiting an old version of myself, but this time I noticed it clearly. And instead of accepting it as normal, I corrected gently. Lights dimmed earlier. Phone out of the bedroom. Breathing slow again. Sleep returned. That is when I understood something important. This was not a temporary challenge, not a 30-day experiment. This was a lifestyle boundary. And boundaries at 50 are powerful. Because at this age, you understand cost. You understand what chronic stress does, what neglect does, what decades of "I'll rest later" can become. I used to believe that major life changes required big courage, quitting a job, moving cities, starting over. But protecting sleep required a quieter courage, saying no to late-night distractions, accepting that some emails could wait, letting the world move forward without my constant attention, trusting that rest was productive. Perhaps the biggest transformation was internal. I began to feel steady, not overly excited, not overly drained, just steady. My emotions felt less extreme. Problems felt manageable. Even my posture changed. When you are well rested, you stand differently. You breathe deeper. You look people in the eye longer. You listen more fully. Sleep did not change my circumstances. It changed my capacity, and capacity changes everything. One evening, as I prepared for bed, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. Same gray hair, same lines around the eyes, same 50-year-old man. But something was different. I did not look tired. For years, there had been a faint dullness in my expression, a heaviness. Now, there was light, not youth, but clarity. And in that moment, I felt something unexpected. Pride. Not because I achieved something impressive, but because I finally respected myself enough to rest. At 50, I learned that recovery is not optional. It is foundational. We talk often about exercise, about diet, about ambition, but sleep quietly supports them all. Without it, everything feels harder. With it, everything feels possible. If you are listening to this and thinking, 8 hours sounds unrealistic, I understand. I thought the same. But what if you tried? Not perfectly, not dramatically, just gently. One earlier light, one phone left outside the bedroom, one slow breath in the dark. What if your body is simply waiting for permission? What if your mind is tired of running? What if the version of you that feels calmer, clearer, stronger is only one full night away? I used to believe that change at 50 had to be big to matter. Now I know. Sometimes it is as simple as turning off the light at 9:30 p.m., closing your eyes, and allowing yourself to fully, deeply rest. Thank you for listening slowly with me. If this story felt familiar, if you are learning English through this quiet reflections, Or if you're simply searching for a calmer way to live, I invite you to stay with this channel. We grow gently here, one story at a time, and maybe tonight you will sleep just a little longer.